Nowhere is the
마이크 테스트 하고 있습니다. 선생님 마이크 잘 들리세요? 네, 네. 네, 네. 네. 네, 네. 마이크 테스트 하고 있습니다. 네, 네.
네네, 사회자 2개고 무선 마이크가 2대인데요.
네, 무선도
이것도 괜찮으시죠? 하나 둘 하나 둘 하나 둘 하나 둘. 네, 마지막 무선입니다. 네. 네.
Yep. And then you can try. Hello, good morning. Yeah, wonderful. Good morning, everyone. Just to let you know that we will start in a minute.
If I sign over there, then the live streaming will be again.
We'll start.
Okay. Then
Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure to welcome you to the regional NAP Expo for Asia and the Pacific, as well as the UN for NAP's regional forum sessions that will be happening in the next 2 days. I will be your moderator for this session, and I will be very happy and I'm honored to be joined by the speakers that we will introduce as we go along with the program. My name is Motsumi Malechani. I work for the UNFCCC Secretariat in the Adaptation Division, and within that I lead the work on national adaptation plans and the support to the least developed countries. I'm pleased to see a lot of familiar faces, friends and colleagues, and it will be exciting to interact with you over the course of the 3 days to see how we can work together in adaptation. And indeed, we had inspiring speeches in the morning at the opening on how we need to continue to find ways to bring about transformative adaptation action. How do we scale up adaptation? And this will be the result of our conversations that we will have today. My colleagues will introduce the details in the program, but for now, we will be meeting for the 3 days and then into the half of the Wednesday. And before I start, the NAP Expos are conducted by the Least Developed Countries Expert Group. Unfortunately, because of many conflicting schedules and so many other things happening, the members of the least developed countries, the chair himself, he would have loved to be here, but unfortunately he could not join us at this occasion. However, I do have his remarks that if you will bear with me, I will have to say them in the way that he would have said them and read them a little bit briefly. On behalf of the UNFCCC Secretariat, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the Regional NAP Expo and the UN for NAPS Forum. The Least Developed Countries Expert Group provides technical guidance and support to the developing countries in addressing climate change adaptation, including through primarily the national adaptation plans. The work of the leg itself is to make sure that each and every least developed country or each and every country is able to move towards successful adaptation And what we mean by successful adaptation, it means that countries have set up systems for effective adaptation planning at the national level, and they are also proactively implementing actions that are benefiting the local societies, the local people, to save them from the adverse impacts of climate change, to secure livelihoods, to protect the environment, and make sure that sustainable development thrives. As part of that, the leg has been organizing the NAP Expos since 2013. The NAP Expos are organized at the global level as well as the regional levels. The regional NAP Expos take advantage of the existence of major conferences that are happening in the regions, and in this occasion, we are partnering together with our colleagues from UNEP, who are also organizing the 8th Asia Pacific Network Forum, and in this case, we will also attach in the regional NAP Expo to be organizing it here. The NAP Expo is organized not only by the LDC expert group, it is a community event that is organized by the LEG and many UN organizations and other partners that work with with countries in order to support adaptation. And we are pleased and thankful for the contributions on continued engagement by the many organizations that are engaging in supporting the LEG in these activities. The regional NAP Expos themselves, in this particular one, we will be looking at how to aligning with the vision or with the theme of the Korea Global Adaptation Week on how to scale up and transform adaptation. We need to scale up transformations in ways that we adapt. The various sessions of the Expo will address transformations in key systems. You will see that there are sessions looking at food security, climate smart agriculture, early warning systems, regional risk pooling, and multi-stakeholder engagement for the implementation of NAPs. We all know that finance is a primary enabler for adaptation, and scaling up adaptation goes hand in hand with scaling up access to climate finance and the delivery of funding for adaptation actions as identified and prioritized by the countries themselves in their plans. In this regard, the LEG as well continues to engage the operating entities of the financial mechanism, in particular our colleagues from the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility, as well as the Adaptation Fund board, to see how we can assist the LDCs in effectively doing so. In the program, in that regard, we also do have sessions that will be led by the GCF colleagues in order to support countries towards designing transformative adaptation actions under the financial mechanism. Also interestingly, we also do have sessions that will be led by the delivery partners, in particular our colleagues from UNDP. They will be doing a sessions that is targeting national implementing entities as well as direct access entities to see how to best engage in accessing funding for adaptation. There are numerous adaptation actions on the ground, and we will have this platform to share and learn from each other. We therefore invite every one of us to share your stories, to share your successes, to share also what you may need and how best the community that is around in this room may best help, so that we can make sure that we scale up adaptation in a way that would lead us towards scaled up adaptation. Before we embark on this journey of learning and sharing, I would like to start first with the presentations, as I indicated, from my colleagues to introduce more the details of what we have in the program. I will start first with the presentation on the NAP Expo, or the regional NAP Expo, and that will be done by my colleague Sonam. She will be followed by my colleague Angela. So we do have slides that have been shared that will be displayed on the screen. And maybe Sonam, if you can come and start to introduce the regional NAP Expo. And while Sonam is doing that, I forgot to make some important announcements at the beginning of this. I don't know if it is still possible to make the announcements, primarily which is about the simultaneous interpretation we have in the room. We do have simultaneous interpretation in English as well as in Korea, between English and Korea. English, if I'm getting it well, is in channel 3. You have headsets on your table. And also as an etiquette, I'm sure we are so much used to being in the meetings now, but it's a matter of etiquette if you can make sure that, yeah, here's the channels for the simultaneous interpretation, so you can listen to English or you can listen in Korean as well. So feel free to use the headsets there that you can effectively follow. And the second announcement is about the etiquette in the meeting. Please, let's make sure that we help each other to follow effectively. If you can put your mobile phones or mobile devices on silent so that we can all be able to concentrate and listen. So with those announcements, I now invite my colleague Sonam to come and share with us what we can expect over the 3 days with regard to the Regional NAP Expo. So Sonam, you have the mic.
Thank you, Motsomi. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sonam Laden. I'm with the Adaptation Unit in the UNFCCC, and I'm very pleased to be making this presentation on behalf of the Secretariat and also for the LDC expert group who, as mentioned by Motsomi, our chair, was not able to be present here today. So on behalf of that, I'm very pleased to be making this presentation on the introduction and framing of the Regional NAP Expo. So I think most of us here already know the two core objectives to formulate and implement the national adaptation plans, which is to reduce vulnerability to the impacts of climate change by building adaptive capacity and to facilitate the integration of climate change adaptation into our policies, plans, and programs. There are 4 key elements of the NAP process, and they are laying the groundwork, which is launching the stock taking and identifying available information that's there, identifying capacity gaps, accessing development needs and climate vulnerabilities. And for the second element, which is the preparatory elements, it's analyzing climate change and future scenarios, assessing vulnerability and identifying adaptation options, reviewing and appraising the options, compiling and communicating the NAP and integrating it into our plans. And the third preparatory element is the implementation strategies, where we develop NAP, implementation strategy, and also enhance capacity, promote coordination and synergy with other multilateral environment agreements. And the fourth element is reporting, monitoring, and review, which is monitoring and review of the NAP process and integrating it into the document for future updates and outreach. I think we need to understand the clear distinction between the NAP and the underlying process. The NAP, as we know, is a plan of statements. It's the identified priorities of a country at a given time frame, and then that goes on to inform implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. And the process is actually a continuous work on adaptation, looking at your observations, your scenarios, enhancing your capacity, strengthening your institutions, and these are going on for a long-term activities, which need to be also continuously be done in an iterative manner. So the stock taking, the identifying gaps, and developing your scenarios and identifying your priorities goes on in a continuous basis. And the NAP that is actually formulated, the plan, will actually reflect these processes into the NAP document on how you are going to continue this iterative process, so that in order to have future better NAPs, you're able to reflect these into your plans. The NAP Expo objectives, these are quite wordy in here, so I'll probably just summarize it. It's actually to facilitate the integration between the country teams and the providers of support, to discuss country experiences, best practices, lessons learned, and the gaps and needs and information on support provided, and to offer a platform for countries to interact with other agencies, as mentioned by Motsomi, like the Green Climate Fund, the JEF, the AF, and other organizations that are present here today. So the outcome of the workshop is to, of course, incubate new ideas, in order to transform adaptation planning and implementation, build and strengthen this community of practice that we have here, regional cooperation on adaptation projects, and joint publication and products that can come out from these interactions. So some of the highlights from the previous NAP Expos. We have seen that countries are making noteworthy progress on the NAPs. There are growing evidence of effective adaptation solutions, and also learning has definitely been an important part of adaptation, which is why I think we're all here today, to continue this process of learning and sharing experiences. There's a vast amount of data that also exists, which can be used by countries in order to progress their work on NAPs. There's also a vibrant support system for NAPs. I think this community here already expresses that the kind of support that is existing here. And we've also learned that while countries move from formulation process to the implementation, it's been useful to use a systems approach. So rather than having independent small projects being implemented, you can use an overall systemic approach that kind of resonates with your overall system of, it can be food security, a water resource, so it helps to actually have a systems approach. So finally, I think I'd like to conclude by saying that the NAP Expos are still an effective forum of bringing together different actors and stakeholders to share experiences and lessons learned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sonam, for that introduction. Before maybe I can invite, if there are any questions, I'll invite my colleagues, Angela, as well, to introduce the sessions of the UN for NAPS Forum, after which maybe there can be some questions if you need any clarifications to know how we're going to go about the 2 weeks. So, Angela, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone, and I hope we will be able to come a little closer in the next days. There's quite a distance between this space and you. So I'd like to say a few words about the UN for NAPS Forum that we are holding in the context of this Korea Global Adaptation Week. I would like to start with a few words about the UN for NAPS initiative. Next slide. I can move them, okay. Okay, thank you. The UN for NAPS initiative was launched by the UNFCCC Secretariat in 2021. In response to a number of COP mandates that have been asking for a greater involvement of the wider UN system in climate change adaptation. It is a platform for countries, and initially we have been focusing on LDCs and SIDS for them to communicate their needs for technical assistance around NAP formulation and implementation on an ongoing basis. And as soon as we receive these requests in the Secretariat, we forward them to relevant organizations from a pool of currently 47 organizations, intergovernmental and UN organizations. Next slide, please. This offers an overview of the current participating organizations, and as you can see, it's from a wide area of themes and expertise in different areas of work, from humanitarian organizations to development organizations, as well as organizations that are part of the financial mechanism of the UNFCCC. And this reflects a bit on the wide areas of expertise of these organizations. So from for example, settlements over gender to transport, circular economy. It's a wide area of support that can be offered through the initiative. This is just a collection of links where you can find further information. This is also reflected in the booth that we have here. So feel free to pass by and also, of course, approach us for any further information. Now to talk about the UN for NAPS forum that we are organizing in the context of this week. We will have 4 sessions starting today, this afternoon at 2 with a focus on sea level rise. The second on flash floods at 4 today, and then tomorrow morning with a focus on sustainable agriculture and fisheries. And the final one on Wednesday morning, which will be open depending on whatever countries are putting forward in that session. The themes were based on the requests for technical assistance that we have received from countries in the region, as well as the priorities that countries have put forward in their NAPs. In these sessions, country representatives from the region will present and share with us their challenges, experiences, and needs for technical assistance around NAP formulation and implementation along those focus areas, and UN for NAP's partner organizations, representatives will be in the room to respond to those priorities and needs that have been put forward. And of course, we encourage an exchange between countries, acknowledging that the wide expertise in the countries, and would appreciate an interactive and active exchange also between the countries, of course. In addition, should country representatives have any specific requests, either to generally discuss about the initiative or to reach out to any of the organizations that are present or that we can also connect with remotely, please feel free to send an email, and we'll be happy to set up meetings during these days or in the follow-up to the event. With that, I thank you all, and I hope to see many of you this afternoon in the first session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angela, for that introduction. I'll take this moment to pause and see if there are any questions regarding the program. I'm also trying to ask our team at this back if they can put up also the program for the regional NAP Expo, because I know that we missed out to mention that. But let me see if there are any questions for clarification. I can already see there's a hand at the back, Salim. Can we get a mic to the back?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mutsomi. Good morning to everybody. My name is Salimul Haq. I am the director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development at the Independent University, Bangladesh. I just want to share congratulations to all of you for setting up this series of meetings and taking the opportunity of many people being here in Songdo to have the regional expo. I'd just like to take this moment, if I can, to share a little bit of our experience in sharing knowledge on adaptation. So the first thing that we have found in working on adaptation, which we've been doing for over 2 decades, is that international consultants flying into a country to tell people how to adapt is not a particularly useful way. Coming and showing PowerPoint presentations does not show you how to adapt. Adaptation is very location specific, and people are doing it at particular places. They're learning how to do it. So the best way to learn from those who are doing adaptation is what we call peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. You go to the ones who are doing the adaptation and spend time with them, not a PowerPoint presentation, not a workshop, but spend time with them and see how they are doing it. Not with the view to go home and replicate everything exactly, but to see what you might learn in terms of how to do things that are similar to when you go home and do it. So one of the things we offer is peer-to-peer visits to my country, Bangladesh. If anybody is interested, come and see me. We'd be very happy to organize a peer-to-peer group from your country or from your organization to come and spend some time in Bangladesh, specifically looking at any aspects of adaptation that may be common. Ecosystem-based adaptation, deltaic adaptation, locally led adaptation, those are the kinds of things we work on. At the same time, we also run capacity building training courses, week-long training courses, specifically on what we call locally led adaptation. Again, these are open to anybody who wants to apply. We also do them online, but online is not as effective as in person. As I mentioned, in person, coming and spending a week in Bangladesh is much more valuable. And then finally, we also offer a full master's degree program at my university on climate change and development. It's a one-year master's degree program, if anybody is interested to learn. It's a much more intensive course, mostly on adaptation, but not 100% on adaptation. It also does mitigation and other issues like loss and damage. So I just wanted to share with you, Matsomi, the opportunities that exist in this region for knowledge exchange, capacity building from each other in the region. Meetings like this are very useful, but they're not enough. We have to do more, particularly if we want to be transformative about the adaptation, which is the slogan of this week's meeting. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Salim, for that important reflection. Can I see if there's another request for the floor? Building on what Salim just said, I just wanted to also show on the screen the program, and I want to also express thanks to the countries that will be joining us in the sessions of the UN for NAPS, as well as the sessions of the Regional NAP Expo, to share their experience and where they are, and also to have a conversation with many of the organizations that are in here on how we can assist them. Participants, particularly from Pakistan, from Thailand, from Vanuatu, from Uzbekistan, from Brunei Darussalam, from Vietnam, and many others will be with us and sharing their stories. And I want to take this opportunity also to invite any one of the countries that are in the room here. I'm seeing that we have many of the countries. We will be very happy to have you in these sessions, because this is, as Salim indicated rightfully, you are the ones that are doing work on the ground. You know how you're doing it well. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your experience, and we want to see how you can share that experience with others to learn. So we will be very happy to have you, and we would actually want to have you lead most of the conversations that we'll be having. My colleague Angela here that just presented, and my colleague Sonam as well, if you want to speak in any of the sessions, I know many of them have been sending you emails. Please do approach them, do approach me as well, so that we can make this conversation as fruitful as possible. Let me see if there's any request for the floor. Otherwise, I wanted to also display the program for the Expo so that you have an idea of what will be happening when. It is now up on the screen, and if you can see that now we are in the part where we are doing the opening part or the introductory part of the NAP Expo. If we go to the afternoon of the same day at 6 o'clock, today, it's 4 o'clock, in the afternoon after we have lunch, after we have lunch, there will be a session on early warning systems. This session will be led by, we will have presentations from the WMO, from our colleagues from the GCF as well, and from Laos as well to hear about their experience. You will all know that the UN Secretary General has issued a call for every human being to be covered by early warning or any warnings over the next 5 years, and we will be sharing experience on how we can advance and share that. The UN for NAPS Forum will be focusing on sea level rise and storms as one of the important risks in this region, as Angela did indicate, and in that we will have, of course, we will have a conversation where we're focusing on Pakistan. And in the UN for NAPS sessions, actually, as Angela did indicate, we really want to hear from the countries, where do you want to go? What do you want to do in the next couple of months, in the next year? And how do you see the community that is in here supporting you best do that? And we are very happy to be able to coordinate that and bring in a lot of the organizations that are in this room. And in fact, I'm tempted to also invite my colleagues from the many organizations that are in the room here to simply stand up so that we can see who they are. I know that we have colleagues from UNCDF, we have colleagues from the FAO, colleagues from UNDP, GCF, and many others. Maybe we'll be continuing to meet as we continue to interact throughout the course of the day. Any questions? Okay. The full program of the Expo itself, you can go to napexpo.org/Asia 2023. So napexpo.org or org/Asia 2023. We will have the whole program there, and all the presentations that will be made here by our keynote speakers, as well as those that will be shared by countries, we will deposit them, all of them there, so that we can build this knowledge base that will benefit every one of us in this room. So please do visit that webpage and be able to download and study and follow the conversations that are happening. We also have presentations that have happened in the previous expos. You can go all the way back to 2013. You have all the information there. We will equally do the same with our UN for NAPS Forum. Any material that are being shared by the countries, by the organizations, will be made available on the UN for NAPS Forum page. If you type UN for NAPS, UNFCCC, you will be able to land on our page, and you can navigate to the UN for NAPS Forum sub-page on that. Having said that, if there are no further questions, I now have the pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, who will be talking about transformative adaptations actions in the Asia and the Pacific. We are honored to have Dr. Niladri Gupta with us from ADPC. Many of you in this region, you know very well Asia, the ADPC Center, and he will be introducing with us in terms of what is happening in the region, how can we learn best from that, and I'm glad to invite you, Dr. Gupta, to deliver a keynote presentation. And let's welcome Dr. Gupta with a round of applause.
Thank you, Motsumi. Good morning, all, and annyeonghaseyo to my Korean colleagues. I hope I have pronounced it correctly. So first, I would like to take this opportunity to thank UNFCCC for extending the invitation to me to speak at this very important session on transformative adaptation action at the NAP Expo. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Sanjay Srivastav, Chief of the Disaster Risk Reduction, UNESCAP, for giving me the invitation to represent him to speak on this topic as one of the reviewers of the recently published Asia Pacific Disaster Report 2023. Unfortunately, he couldn't join due to his another commitment in Central Asia coinciding with today's event. So to start with this topic of transformative adaptive action, let me start the discussion with three major events in Asia and the Pacific in the last 1.5 months. So starting with South Korea, on the 14th of July, there was an intense monsoon rainfall triggering floods and landslide in the Chungcheong and North Gyeongsang region, with 47 people killed and still 3 people are missing. Then coming to China, on 29th July 2023, Typhoon triggered an unprecedented rainfall in Beijing and Hebei province next to Beijing, with breaking rainfall records of 140 years since rainfall records started in that region. 20 people dead and 27 still missing. And as near as August 2023 in India, 3 separate intense monsoon rainfall and cloud bursts, an unprecedented landslide in the Himalayan state of Himachal Pradesh, killing 70 people and 20 still missing. And the initial estimated damage is about $1.2 billion. So these are just the intense rainfall-induced events in the last 1.5 months in the region. We also have the forest fire raging across the globe, including the Pacific Islands. We have the unprecedented heat waves and other extreme events. So based on these things, what is the impact on the communities? So if I go to the next slide, this is a voice of the community, which was published last Friday based on the Himachal landslide victims, where they said that death was better than this. So you can see the desperation of the communities on these events. So the quote actually sums it up all. The community who spoke about this has not only lost their loved ones, they have also lost their property and even the land where their houses were once. Because of the landslide, the land doesn't exist anymore. So they were converted from landholders to landless refugees in just a couple of hours maybe. And some even have children, aged and differentially abled family members to take care of. So I would infer this as a call to the scientists, the practitioners, the policymakers and the decision makers to speed up our action, as the window of opportunity is very narrow. And we need to seize this moment to act on building transformative adaptation and building disaster risk resilience. So you may be aware of this report, which was published in July 2023, the Asia-Pacific Disaster Report. This report actually looks into the pathways for transformative adaptation, and I am going to highlight some of them as part of this discussion. So as Professor Salimul Haq just now mentioned about adaptation actions on the ground, that the communities, some of the communities are taking adaptation actions and there has to be a peer-to-peer learning. But besides that, there is also, we have to know what is the risk in the areas. And based on that, we have to locate the communities who are managing these risks effectively and go for the peer-to-peer learning. So this report actually looks into the science of risk information and how the adaptive transformation can be brought in. So if we go to the Asia-Pacific region, it remains the most disaster-prone region in the world, where 2 million people have lost their lives to disasters since 1970, with the biggest cause being storm, the earthquake, the tsunami, followed by floods. Though earthquake is not a climate-induced, but still. In 2020, over 140 disasters struck the Asia-Pacific region, leading to over 7,500 deaths, affecting over 64 million people and causing economic damage estimated to be $57 billion US. And I already spoke on some of the 2023 events, which adds up to these numbers. And just 3 events I spoke of. They were innumerable from January till date. So basically, we are in a disaster emergency. And if we do not speed up our action, we will be really in a mess. So what is the cost of the inaction if we do not take the action? So if you see, the impact of climate warming will lead to a significant increase in the damage for natural hazards. So average annual loss will increase from $24 billion under a 1.5-degree warming scenario to nearly $1 trillion under 2-degree warming scenario, or an increase from 2.9 to 3% of regional GDP. And the Pacific region will experience the highest losses as a share of GDP. So the graph here actually divides the region by various parts of Asia and the Pacific region. So on the right-hand graph, it actually shows that the Pacific region will experience the highest losses as share of the GDP. So if we go to the riskscape of Asia and the Pacific, we will see this actually intensifying and shifting. And the climate-induced disaster risk is actually outpacing the region's resilience. So when this report was prepared, the first initial analysis using the IPCC CMIP6 data, the map which we see here actually denotes the increase in multi-hazard risks under 1.5 degrees C and under 2 degrees C. And some of the hotspots have intensifying risks. So if you see the red and the green areas, the red are the intensifying areas, but the green areas are emerging areas of risk. So they will therefore fall into, the ones which have intensifying risk will fall into a higher risk category than the baseline, and new areas will be coming up having risks. So the cost of inaction will be high and will particularly result in affecting the SDG goals, particularly SDG 13, which is on climate action. In this case, countries must enhance current investments in regional and sub-regional cooperation to better integrate multi-hazard early warning systems and augment good practices in nature-based solutions or green infrastructure and other adaptation measures. And that's where the peer-to-peer learning comes into. Now, if we go into how much will be the transformative adaptation cost. So the climate risk-informed adaptation investment in Asia and Pacific are inadequate. We all know that. It has been spoken in a number of forums, and it covers less than 10% of the required amount. And this graph, these charts also show the variation according to regions within Asia as well as the Pacific. So calculating, if we calculate the average annual losses under the 3 climate scenarios, the 3 SSP scenarios, investment needed for transformative adaptation actually stands at $144.74 billion for the region currently. And with sufficient actions taken, the cost, insufficient actions taken, if we do not take enough actions and fast, this cost will increase to $150.5 billion for 1.5 degrees and $155.9 billion for 2 degree scenario. So these adaptation investment must be risk informed. So what I want to focus on this discussion today is that if we do not have risk informed incorporate into our decision making process and strategically direct towards policy action, then high yield cost benefits will not be there. So we need to have risk informed actions carried out. Where there are multi-hazard risk hotspots across the region, risk-informed policy and transformative actions should capitalize on intersectoral synergies and co-benefits. So we talk about intersectoral synergies and co-benefits a lot, but we need to show it in action. Now, if we come to the next part of how do we protect these at-risk people and development goals. So this report actually has coined some 4 transformative actions. The critical action needs to be taken and the proposed framework of these 4 transformative actions. So the first one is the human imperative to protect people in multi-hazard risk areas and hotspots and reach them till the last mile. Economic necessities in investing in multi-hazard early warning systems to protect people, which is also the call of United Nations Secretary General who recently asked the global community to act for early warning for all. Then the economic imperative to invest in protecting food and energy systems. If we see that adaptation actions till date has been mainly concentrated on food, energy and water. So we need to increase it further. And environmental necessity to conserve biodiversity through nature-based solutions. So it's not only about grey infrastructure, but also green-grey and green infrastructure. So we have to have a synergy between all these 3, the climate information, then the adaptation actions, as well as the funding availability. So when we talk of adaptation actions in a warming world, how it should be done, this is also a framework which has been proposed in the report. So transformative adaptation facilitates a type of adaptation to climate change which goes beyond just adjusting to existing practices, but entails a deep and long-term societal changes that advance overall sustainable development. So if you see that in both the scenarios of 1.5 and at 1.5 degree warming, areas of low to moderate risk categories should incorporate nature-based solutions. That's the adaptation option. But when we go towards the right, when we see that we expand the solution space and achieve transformation, in that case, we have to, instead of current practices of incremental adaptation, we have to catalyze broader changes in the system and structures and expand the solution space, particularly in expanding the multi-hazard risk spots of the subregion at 1.5 degrees warming. A systemic view to adaptation is required, where adaptation is no longer a choice but a necessity. That's where we have to reach the goal for transformative adaptation. So when we talk of these theoretically, we also have, if we go to the practical end, so it's not about the regional action only. We also have to understand if we can actually identify the risk hotspot at a more granular scale. So this is one of the study which has been included in the report. It's related to one of the seeds, the Maldives. So in this one, climate models, because Maldives is a very small country with small atoll, so regional climate models or global climate models or regional climate models won't work. You won't find a single pixel covering the entire, maybe one pixel covering the entire country if we go for future temperature changes or rainfall changes. So the most important part is downscaling. So what was done was that climate models were downscaled from 100-kilometer resolutions to 5-kilometer resolutions. And if you see that the data was from EPIPLAT, and that enabled to visualize the risk. And if you see that the baseline and the precipitation ranges from 2,000 to 2,300 millimeter annually. But if we go, as we go to the near term and the mid term, we see that the rainfall spread actually goes beyond 2,300 millimeter, especially in the central part of the country. But what does it actually say? What is this data actually saying is that the population exposed to flooding currently will go up from 46% to 55%. And this is valid for many regions of the Asia Pacific. Maldives is just one of the examples that we are showcasing here. So in case of Maldives, the total annual precipitation is likely to increase across the country. However, it will increase and intensify around the central atolls. So it's, as we repeat, it's time to act now before it's too late. So what is the key transformative adaptation action? So when we are talking of multi-hazard early warning systems, closing the early warning, early action capacity gap in high-risk LDCs, seeds is a must to ensure a just transition adaptation. So if we see multi-hazard early warning system should be seen in the full value chain, the knowledge risk, the warning and forecasting, risk communication, and preparedness for response. And if we see these graphs, you will see that wherever there has been multi-hazard early warning coverage, it leads to lower mortality rate. So 25% of the countries have access to multi-hazard warning systems, but 20% of them have, only 20% of those 25% countries have actionable risk information. So there is a huge gap. So people in Africa, in South Asia, South and Central America, and the seeds are 15 times more likely to die from climate disasters. But these deaths are preventable if we take the early action on early warning systems establishment along with actionable risk information. So early warning systems are one of the most effective risk reduction and climate adaptation measures to reduce disaster mortality and economic loss to some extent. And I know that in the next session post-lunch there will be a detailed discussion on the multi-hazard early warning systems from our WMO colleague. So I won't go into details of these one. The next is that what is the adaptation cost of this transformative action? So we need a raising the financing ambition. It is a must, as I said, that only 10%, less than 10% of Asia Pacific have the fund for adaptation. The adaptation fund is less than 10% of the requirement. So the investment needed for a transformative adaptation, which I said stand around $145 billion, and this increases to 150.5 and 155 at 1 and 2 degree scenario. But when we see it as a share of the GDP, the Pacific will need to invest almost 3% of its GDP into adaptation measures, which is quite high. Yet the current level of adaptation flow means 92% of the existing adaptation cost in the regions are not covered at all. So if we go for the financing aspect, but before that, if you see the right-hand graph, it's not only about the financing, it's also the debt the countries have. So if a country is at higher risk, but also at higher debt, then there would be an issue about this financing and adaptation and taking action on adaptive transformation, transformative adaptation action. But there are some innovative financing mechanism which has been highlighted in this report. One is about debt for resilience, payment for ecosystem services, biodiversity credits, and restoration insurance service companies. And I'm sure there will be further discussion on these financing mechanisms in the NAP Expo. So now when we go to this risks and the risk information, one of the most important thing that comes up is understanding loss and damage. And loss and damage brought on by climate change are now a priority on the international agenda. And we thank Professor Salimul Haq for taking it up at the international community so that the countries which were affected actually can have finance available to take action. And it is of action which is very fast. And I'm hoping COP28 things would be finalized, that where the fund will be coming from and who would be benefited. But if we talk of loss and damage, I will not go into the financing aspect, but rather I will go into the science behind understanding the future loss and damage. We have to understand that estimation of loss and damage for rapid onset disasters need to incorporate climate factors. So future climate information, if it is not incorporated, we will never get the reality of potential loss and damage into the future. And that is a must. Though we know that for slow onset disaster, advanced quantification is a bit of challenging, but I think that the scientific community will also be able to do it as technology progresses and information progresses. As for example, the IPCC 5 models only took consideration of the emission scenarios, but we see that the IPCC 6 models actually are taking consideration of both the emission scenarios as well as the socioeconomic impact. So we have the social context now into the modeling landscape. So similarly, we can increase this knowledge further. Now, let me give you 2-3 examples, again from the report and some of ADPC's work very recently. One is about the sea level rise. So if you see these maps, from the baseline to the near term to the mid term, actually some of the atolls would be almost submerged. So if we have this risk information, then we can actually put it into the models and actually get information on what would be the potential loss and damage in this country. Similarly, if I take an example from some recent ADPC works on the energy sector, which we are actually planning, it's not, but here what we are trying to do is, when we go for the baseline data and elements and risks, when we are analyzing the hazards, that's where we are bringing in the future climate information. And the hazard assessment actually incorporates that under various scenarios in the future, what would be the hazard scenario. So till now, we were looking at past information and projecting the risk based on past. But as we know, past is almost no more key to the future, because the future is totally different and the changes are very rapid. So that's we are exploring on. And then comes the exposure assessment, where we are actually assessing the cascading effects of the risks on power sector. Also, we are going to understand the vulnerability assessments and then going for the risk assessments where the energy sector can benefit from that. Similarly, in a recent project funded by NORAD in Vietnam, in 2 cities of Mitho and Nam Dinh, where we have carried out climate-inclusive hazard assessments, where you have incorporated future scenarios into hazards like floods, strong winds, heat waves, and cold waves in these areas, depending on which area, because like some cities are affected by heat waves, strong winds, and floods, and some by cold waves in the future. So we can actually see what are the changes in the future in the 2040, 2060, and 2100 scenarios of CMIP 6. So these were just examples of how to include risk information into our planning process, and that's going for transformative adaptation. But to gist the framework for transformative adaptation, as has been documented in this report, so the first and the key messages from this Asia-Pacific disaster report focuses on how to seize the moment right now before the disaster risk irreversibly outspaces resilience. The first is, We know that a disaster emergency is underway, not on the way, it's underway. And disaster risk is forecast to intensify in existing hotspots, and new hotspots are likely to emerge. Second is temperatures are rising, disaster risks is outpaces resilience, the cost of inaction is also on the rise. So our strategy would be to seize this narrow window to increase disaster resilience through early warning systems, nature-based solutions, and financing ambitions. So in order to ensure that the people and developmental gains are protected, we must also strengthen the financing ambitions and build resilient infrastructure, and also see that early warning reaches all. So I would like to close this presentation with a short video summing up the entire report.
Nowhere is the escalating threat of climate disasters greater than in Asia and the Pacific. Over the past decades, floods, tropical cyclones, heat waves, droughts, and earthquakes have become more frequent and intense. The Asia-Pacific Disaster Report 2023 reveals that without immediate action, temperatures rising to 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius will push disaster risk beyond feasible adaptation, endangering sustainable development. The cost of inaction is daunting. Average annual losses could soar from $924 billion to nearly $1 trillion. The region has a narrow window of opportunity to increase resilience. Asia and the Pacific must seize this moment. Strengthening early warning systems must be prioritized as it carries the potential to significantly reduce disaster mortality and disaster losses by up to 60%. Investing in nature-based solutions can deliver up to 40% of needed climate actions. The investments needed for transformative adaptation stand at $144.74 billion for the region, or 0.49% of regional GDP. The report emphasizes a systems thinking approach to strengthen the synergy between disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, and to make food and energy systems more resilient. Emerging innovations in financing mechanisms can accelerate disaster risk reduction and climate action. Technology is making these processes of transformative adaptation easier. Digital platforms such as the ESCAP Asia-Pacific Risk and Resilience Portal empower decision makers with evidence for informed decision-making. These solutions can be strengthened by building economies of scale through existing institutions, such as the ESCAP's Multi-Donor Trust Fund, Tsunami, Disaster, and Climate Preparedness. Now is the moment to work together. Through regional cooperation, we can build on innovation and scientific breakthroughs that accelerate transformative adaptation across the region. Only together we can implement a regional strategy for universal early warnings, safeguard developmental gains, unlock financing for proactive actions, and seize this moment for transformative adaptation towards a resilient future in Asia and the Pacific.
So thank you very much for your patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta, for that excellent presentation, which actually brings an interesting perspective and insight that we all know in the Asia-Pacific region, that the region is prone to disasters, much more than what happens in the rest of the world. And I can very much relate to this in several countries across the region. What also is important, I think what you highlighted, is that access to multi-hazard early warning systems can significantly reduce mortality and losses to the economy. And of course, the framework for transformative action that you mentioned brings together the key elements in terms of talking about food and talking about nature-based solutions. In fact, this is very important introduction to the sessions that we'll also have in this afternoon, where we will have sessions that will look at early warning systems, one of them, and another one will look at food security later in the afternoon. And in addition to that, under the UN for NAP sessions, we'll be looking at particularly the storms, which you actually highlighted as one of the biggest disasters or hazards to the region. I would now like to open the floor for questions, reflections, insights, contributions to the presentation made by Dr. Gupta. So the floor is open. I see a hand here. If you can say your name and possibly the organization or country that you're from. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Deepshikha Sharma. I'm working with ECMODE, International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, based out of Nepal. And just to introduce, we work for 8 regional member countries. We specifically work for Hindu Kush Himalaya region, starting from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, India, Myanmar, Pakistan, Nepal. I think I've covered all. So yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. And this is very, very important also for the region, like you already mentioned. One thing which I found could be also an added value is from the mountains perspective. And if you see that in the last AR6 cycle, there's specifically a dedicated chapter on mountains. So the effects of cryosphere, the effects on permafrost, or because of all these climate change and impacts. During our research, we also found that a lot of these glaciers have melted and resulted in glacial lakes. And there is a big threat of GLOFs now, which is also should be somewhere reflected in terms of, because of the linkages between the upstream and the downstream, and the whole effect of on the ecosystem. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much, and hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Aisha, I'm from Pakistan, and I work for Pathfinder International, which is an NGO that works in several countries. We're currently implementing a larger, wide-scale, women-led climate change resilience project in 2 provinces of our country that were deeply affected by floods. I think what I wanted to mention is really useful presentation on the topics and the areas that you want to focus on when you do disaster response. But for me, the challenge is when we talk about resilience building, it's a very generic word that we use everywhere. What does resilience mean for the communities that are living in coastal areas versus communities that are urban and still face disaster? That definition, I'm afraid, doesn't exist. We have to define that ourselves, and we need to take into account community level information. I mean, what does a community want in terms of resilience? Some may want healthcare, some may want employment, some may want housing. And that is a generic word we've heard across all forums. We need to build resilience, we have to have resilience mechanisms. But what is it that we refer to when we talk about resilience? I think that's a really big challenge for working within our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aisha, for that reflection. Do we have any more reflections, questions? Yeah, Salim, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta, for that excellent presentation. I have no disagreements with what you've presented. I just want to offer an alternative framing of how we might achieve transformative adaptation. And I preface this by repeating what I said earlier, adaptation is a bottom-up action, not a top-down action. And unless the people at the bottom know what to do and are encouraged and supported to do it, no amount of global information is going to make a blind bit of difference to them. And so I would offer, in my view, not opposing, but a different approach to investing in education at the national level, in educating our citizens to become climate resilient, to become adaptive, investing in building adaptive capacity of the entire country, in every country. And for that, we don't need these multi-billion-dollar global figures. We have education budgets. We're just not educating them well. We are using the money that we have to make them not well educated. So we need to change the way we educate. We need to change the way we are building our own young citizens, because that's our biggest asset, our young people. If we can educate, capacitate, enable them, then they will make their own countries resilient and adaptive more than high technology will. I'm not saying I'm against technology. I'm not saying I'm against having these risk interventions, but I am saying that there is much that can be done now with what we have already, instead of looking to solutions coming from the outside. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salim, for that reflection. Let me see if Dr. Gupta has any reflections from the comments that have been made before we take any further reactions to that. So if we can, or you can use this one as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for the reflections. I would not answer individually because there may be a lot of overlaps. But first of all, my colleague in EC mode who just talked about the upstream and the downstream communities. Yeah, that's very important because we in ADPC also has been working on early warning systems, like community-based early warning systems, because it sometimes happens that the national weather services may be transmitting the information, but it doesn't reach the village, even the upstream or the downstream. So there has been some experimental studies in the Kosi River Basin with funding from Lutheran World Relief, where communities have been actually interacting and sending information. The communities in Nepal actually sending information to the communities downstream in Bihar, even before the National Weather Service gives that forecast. So that strengthening is really required. So what Professor Salimul Haq just now mentioned about the bottoms-up approach, yeah, it's true, bottoms-up approach is required. But another thing that comes to my mind based on your reflection is that definitely bottoms-up approach is the need for locally led adaptation, but also the government policies. When we are talking of the funds being spent, educational fund is not decided by the communities, it's decided by at the higher level. So we have to also enhance the capacities of these decision makers or the policy makers or even the politicians who can actually force to direct the money for this education to make the community climate resilient. Because in many of the reports we find that when there is a political will, it will happen. Like Bangladesh is a very good example. There is a political will, it's happening, but many countries it is required, but maybe the political will is not there. So we have to enhance the capacities of that part of the community also, because they are also part of the community, but at a higher level because of some reasons. So we have to do that. And regarding your question about resilience, yeah, it's a very good question. Resilience is a very broad term, and resilience has different definition at different level, whether it's village, whether it's urban areas, or even if we talk it about the country. So I think when we talk of resilience at the local level, it is totally to the local context. Suppose I gave you the example of the landslide. So if that community who lost everything from their houses to loved ones to their land even, for them resilience has a totally different definition. It would be resilient if that slope may have been protected. Say the person wouldn't have lost the land, the house and all the common and the loved ones. But if we go to a city, like I gave the example of South Korea, the 20 people that died, many of them died below an underpass in the city. They were waterlogged and they couldn't come out and they died there. So it's a totally different thing. We need underpasses to make traffic smooth in cities so that there is no traffic jams. But those underpasses may not be resilient enough to manage the floods. So do we have those options in the urban planning to protect those underpasses from water? That is, in that way, resilience is another definition. And if we talk of a country, definitely underpasses and communities also become part of the decision, but it's also resilience of the country as a whole, because every country has a different disasters happening at different locations. So case-to-case basis, it has to be defined, and I would ask you, if you have a definition for a resilience, in your organization, have you defined resilience for different categories of population or landscapes? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta, for that. Let me see if there are more reflections. Actually, the question that you were asking about the definition of resilience, Aisha, is quite interesting, and I think this is part of the ongoing conversations as well under the GGA in terms of how do we define that state or the landing zone in terms of where we want to be. Is it something that we want to portray whether no one goes hungry because of climate change, as we would say, or is it that no person on earth actually yearns for water, or is it something that we want to say that no person dies, which I think is one important one, dies from climate-induced disasters, or we don't see dents to our economy as a result of climate hazards. I think these are all things that many of us, we are thinking about, and it's an issue of how do we start to measure those. But it is true indeed that communities need to also be able to define what is it that for them defines the resilience from climate risks in a way that then our interventions will be directed to that. And I also do like the issue of the investment in the community capacity as well, in terms of how we build the capacity at the community, at the systemic level. The education is an important aspect as well in terms of that, in terms of how do we shift the mindsets from today into the mindsets of the people that will be able to build the resilience in stronger ways into the future. Do we have any more reflections or questions? Yes, please. I see one hand over there.
My name is Jennifer George. I'm from the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership. And I would just like to raise our voice for biodiversity. And in this, when we see that we put people at the centre of disaster, we also need to have biodiversity. And our organisation is a international multi-stakeholder partnership across East Asia and Australasia. So we have national partners across 22 countries across that area. And so when a disaster happens in each of these areas, our birds that we are most concerned about also suffer. We have just over 250 birds across that. Many of them in the East Asian Australasian Flyway are endangered, some of them critically endangered. And I think that I would just like, as a part of this organisation, to make sure that that is part of this conversation too. It's not just about our birds, but it is about the broader biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that reflection. Do we have one more? Or three more? Okay. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Just when we are talking of this impact of the disasters in the communities, one thing a lot of organizations are currently doing, but that needs information gathering in that sphere needs more work. One is the evidences. When we talk of an adaptation action, whether it is transformative or a normal adaptation action, what are the evidences? Because we as organizations always recommend some adaptation actions, but how much do we evaluate them, say after 5 years or 10 years, whether that adaptation action is working? As part of the project we evaluate, but a project period is not a time period for evaluating only, but we have to see if something is established or some practice has been upgraded or the communities are practicing, for how long that practice is actually helping adaptation. So evidence gathering is also one of the very important part, which I personally feel, and we always try to find evidences that whether this option has worked or not worked, because it's not that all options has to work, because we always have many of us have a thinking that everything has to be positive. It can't be positive everything. Some will work, some will not work. One that doesn't work, obviously we need to know why it didn't work, and then maybe we have to modify, and that's how the cross-learning and the peer learning goes on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Cooper. And one more time, can we give a round of applause to the excellent presentation, the input. Indeed, this is going to serve as a nice framing to what we will be doing for the rest of the afternoon today. And as we indicated in the program, we do have two sessions in the afternoon after tea. We will have a session on early warning systems, as well as one which is led through the UN for NAPS. We will be talking more on sea level rise and storms. This is immediately after the lunch. And then after the afternoon tea, we will have two more sessions, one on food security in NAPS, led by our colleagues from FAO, with also our contribution there. And there will be one more session on UN for NAPS that will be looking at flash floods. I would like to invite Angela, do you want to say a few words about a little bit more specifics about the two sessions that we can expect this afternoon on the UN for NAPS? And I don't know also whether our colleagues from the FAO want to say just one word. I saw Yannick, but I don't know if Mikael is in the room. If you want to say a few words about the session on the food systems in NAPS in the afternoon later on. Yeah, Angela, please. Huh? What?
I just pointed out that we also have Amir in the room from WMO to speak about the early warning more. Regarding the two UN for NAP sessions that we have today, the first one that's at 2 in room 207, just as the other one, will focus on sea level rise and storms. We will have a presentation by Pakistan and one by UNESCAP with examples from the Maldives. And we will thus hear from the countries on their respective core needs for technical assistance, and I invite all the partners that are here to join, and also in case you have colleagues that can join remotely, we will also be happy to facilitate that. And then the second one is going to be on the topic of flash floods, and that's going to happen again in room 207, and I very much hope that we have a strong attendance. And I just wanted to also make a comment on the earlier discussion around resilience from a more maybe academic point of view. I think it's also interesting to observe that there has been this shift to the term resilience, and the buzzword that was there before was vulnerability. I believe it's more than just a shift in buzzwords, because it's really about thinking about how this vulnerability comes about. And while the focus on resilience is, puts a much stronger demand on the population to actually find solutions, that's maybe something to think about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Angela. So if you want to follow the sessions on the UN for NAPS, room 207. And I can see my colleague from FAO wants to say a few words about the session on food security in NAPS.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Bo Damon from Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, Asia Pacific Office. This afternoon, I believe at 4 in room 206, we'll be organizing a session on food security, agri-food system, and NAPS, and looking at the important role that the NAPS can play in terms of strengthening resilience of agri-food systems. We'll be having some interventions from colleagues from Cambodia, Mongolia, Nepal, also Nauru, and interventions as well from colleagues at UN Environment and also the Green Climate Fund. So We'd like to welcome you all to come and join our session in room 206 this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And so the session on food security NAPS, your room is room T206. Both rooms are just as you get out of here to the right. So they are on the same floor, 206 and 207. We will be in there for the rest of the afternoon. We have one more session on early warning systems. I don't know if, I saw that Amir is in the room. I don't know if Amir, you want to say a few words about what we can expect in the session on early warning systems? Yeah. Microphone here to Amir from WMO.
Thank you, Matsomi. My name is Amir Delju, Senior Scientific Officer from the World Meteorological Organization. Early warning system, which was launched last year at COP27, has 4 pillars. I will introduce the coordination level that is taking place between the leads of 4 pillars and what we will deliver to COP28. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amir, for that. So we do have the early warning system session as well. It will be in room 206. So after lunch, we start with the early warning systems in 206, and then in 207, we have UN FONAP session on sea level rise and storms. Then after the tea, we will have then food security NAPS in room 206, and then UN FONAPs in 207. So looking forward to seeing you in both, and otherwise, we will reconvene again here in the plenary tomorrow morning from 9 o'clock, and then we will have keynotes from there, after which then we will continue with our discussion. So, and now I think this is a good time to break for lunch. So I don't know if there are any announcements on where we will get lunch. But there should be directions that you will see who follow with the people in terms of how we get lunch. Thank you. And of course, lunch is graciously provided by our hosts. I think the hall is somewhere if you go to the right, but you will figure it out. We'll all figure it out together.